just leave the kids with her. After all, it's not like she does anything. That was the Christmas plan I happened to overhear from my own son, my hand still clutching a receipt for over $2,000 for the grand feast I had secretly paid for as their gift. My name is Joan Miller. I'm a 72-year-old retired teacher here in Denver, Colorado, and that single moment, well, it changed everything. Instead of handing over that gift, I decided to rewrite the entire script of my life. If you've ever felt taken for granted, this story is for you. I hope you'll stick with me. And I'd love for you to leave a comment and tell your own story, because every single one of us deserves to be heard. The dim blue light from my computer screen cast a glow on my face, highlighting the tired lines that the morning's bathroom mirror had tried its best to hide. Outside, a gentle December snow was falling, the first flakes of the season clinging to my office window like powdered sugar dusted on a pane of glass. The room was so quiet I could hear the steady ticking of the old grandfather clock in the corner, an heirloom from my father, and the low hum of the computer tower. Those were the sounds of my life now, steady, predictable, and, in a way I'd convinced myself of, pleasantly solitary. My index finger, its knuckle just a bit swollen with morning arthritis, hovered over the mouse. On the screen, my bank's online payment page showed the final, blinking, impersonal number, $1,742.58. It was Kevin's monthly credit card statement. My son. I stared at the number. It wasn't shocking, not anymore. It was simply part of the routine, a fixed expense on the balance sheet of my life, even though my name wasn't on it. $1,742.58. I could break it down in my head. Probably 300 of that was from the gourmet grocery store where Brenda, my daughter-in-law, liked to buy her imported cheeses and organic olive oil. There was sure to be a few hundred for the kids' clothes designer outfits they'd outgrow in a matter of months. And perhaps an expensive dinner at that steakhouse downtown, a date night they'd awarded themselves after a stressful week at work. I let out a long breath, a thin cloud that disappeared into the room's cool air. I wasn't angry. Anger had left me years ago, replaced by a heavy sense of resignation, an acceptance that I'd cloaked in the noble robe of a mother's love. Kevin works so hard, I'd tell myself, repeating the familiar mantra. He was a sales manager for a big company. The pressure was immense. Brenda was at home with 3 children and heavens, 3 kids in this day and age. They had that big mortgage on their beautiful house in a good suburb. They needed a little help. This was the story I told myself. The story of a widowed mother, fortunate enough to have a decent pension from 35 years of teaching and the life insurance money my late husband Robert had so carefully left behind. I told the story of a mother who had resources and a son who needed them. A perfect match. A balance. I moved the cursor and clicked. A small window popped up, asking if I was sure I wanted to make this transaction. I always found that question funny. Did the bank have any idea that my certainty didn't come from financial logic, but from something deeper, more primal? I am a mother, and this is what mothers do. I clicked, confirm. The number vanished, replaced by a line of green text. Your payment has been processed. Thank you. I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel joy. I just felt empty. Like I just finished filling a bucket with a hole in the bottom. I knew that next month, a similar number would appear, and I would be sitting here again, in this same dim blue light, repeating the very same action. It was an invisible cycle, a tether binding me to their lives, a rope I had braided myself, one strand at a time. I pushed my chair back, the wheels murmuring against the old Persian rug. I walked over to the oak desk that used to be Robert's. Everything on it was just as he'd left it. His favorite fountain pen in a ceramic mug. Our wedding photo from over 50 years ago in a tarnished silver frame. We were so young in the picture, our eyes sparkling with dreams of a future we would build together. And we did build it. A good home, 2 sons, summers at the lake. We'd had a good run. But Robert had been gone for 10 years now, leaving a space in the house and in my heart that nothing could ever quite fill. I sometimes wondered what he'd say if he saw me now, quietly paying bills that weren't mine. He was a practical man, an engineer who believed in numbers and balance. He would have frowned, taken off his glasses and asked, "Joan, what are you doing? The boy needs to learn to stand on his own 2 feet. I know that's what he would have said, and maybe that's why I only started doing this after he was gone, when there was no one left to question it. When there was no one, I had to explain this twisted logic of love to. I left the study and walked into the living room, where the Christmas tree, tall enough to nearly touch the ceiling, filled the air with the fresh scent of pine. Its lights blinked, the shiny ornaments reflecting the warm glow from the fire crackling in the hearth. Under the tree was a mountain of presents, wrapped in red and green foil paper, tied with shimmering gold bows. This was the second part of my silent duty, creating the perfect Christmas. I knelt beside the presents, the soft carpet cushioning my knees. My hand brushed across a large rectangular box, wrapped in paper covered with planets and rocket ships. That was the telescope for Leo, my oldest grandchild. He was 10 and obsessed with space. I had spent weeks researching, reading reviews to find the best one in my price range, one powerful enough for him to see the craters on the moon and the rings of Saturn. I pictured his face as he unwrapped it, his blue eyes lighting up with wonder. Next to it was a 3-story dollhouse, a perfect miniature of a Victorian home for Maya. She was 7 and had a wild imagination. I'd bought it from a craft toy store and had spent an entire afternoon assembling it myself, piece by tiny piece. I imagined her arranging the miniature furniture, creating stories for her family of dolls. And for Noah, the youngest at 5, there was a set of the best noise-canceling headphones. He was a sensitive boy, easily overwhelmed by noise and chaos. Brenda often complained about how he'd cry and get fussy at family gatherings. I thought, maybe this was more than a gift. It was a sanctuary, a little piece of peace he could carry with him. I chose these gifts with all my love and attention. I knew the hobbies, the fears, the secret dreams of each of my grandchildren. My love for them was the one thing in my life that had no ambiguity. It was pure, strong, and unconditional. But as I looked at this pile of gifts, a cold thought crept into my mind. The money I'd spent on these presents, plus the money I'd just paid on the credit card bill, plus the cash I would slip into an envelope for Kevin and Brenda, as a Christmas bonus, all added up to a hefty sum. It was far more than the Christmas budget of most of my friends from my book club, but I pushed the thought away. This is what I did. I was the family's silent benefactor, the safety net, the problem solver, the one who made things easier. I did it because I could, and because, deep down, I was afraid that if I stopped, my role in their lives would disappear too. Who would I be if not the ever-helpful mother? I'd just be a lonely old woman in a house that was too big for her. That fear, more than any financial annoyance, was what drove me. On the mantelpiece, among the Christmas cards, was a postcard from Santa Fe. The front was a picture of a vibrant desert sunset, all oranges and purples. On the back was a scrawled message from Pat, my best friend since college. "Joan, you still owe me a Christmas. We've got wine, a fireplace, and 0 screaming children. Come on down. P." Pat was my complete opposite. She never married, had no kids, and lived the life of a free-spirited potter in New Mexico. She always told it like it was. Every time I told her about another little bit of help I'd given Kevin, I could hear her sigh over the phone, all the way across the hundreds of miles. "Joan," she'd say, "love isn't a blank check." I smiled thinking of her. Pat's invitation was like a doorway to another universe, one where I wasn't mom or grandma but just Joan. But it was a doorway I never dared to walk through. Family always came first. That was the unwritten rule I had lived by my entire life. I have another son, you see, Dylan. He lives in Oregon with his wife and their golden retriever. Dylan is a botanist, a quiet, kind soul. He calls me every Sunday, without fail. His calls are always long, full of stories about rare plants he's found or hikes they've taken in the forest. He has never asked me for a dime. For my birthday, he sent me a basket of succulents he'd grown himself. For Christmas, he and his wife sent a photo album chronicling their year. Their gifts weren't costly, but they were always full of time, effort, and thought. They were everything I truly wanted. But Dylan was far away, and Kevin was right here, a 15-minute drive away. And in life, as in physics, the gravitational pull of proximity often wins. The phone rang, cutting through my thoughts. I glanced at the caller ID. It was Kevin. My heart gave a little leap, a foolish flicker of hope that maybe he was calling to thank me for paying the bill. "Hello?" I answered, trying to keep my voice cheerful. "Hey, Mom, it's me." Kevin's voice came through, brisk and a little distracted. I could hear the kids shouting in the background. "Listen, I don't have much time. Just a quick question." "Of course, dear." "What is it?" "So, this weekend on Saturday, are you free? Brenda and I got invited to this corporate Christmas party. It's a big deal. I really have to be there. Could you watch the kids for us? From maybe 6 o'clock till late." The silence lasted only a second. In that second, I could have said no. I could have said I had plans. I could have said I was tired, but I didn't. Habit 1. The role took over. "Of course," I heard myself say, my voice soft and agreeable. "I'd be happy to. What time will you bring them over?" "Awesome. You're the best, Mom. Around 6 then. Thanks a million." And then, a dry click. He'd hung up. Not a word about how I was doing. Not a thank you for the nearly $2,000 payment. Just another request. Another empty slot in his schedule that I was expected to fill. I put the phone down. The fire in the hearth crackled, and the lights on the tree continued their merry blinking. But suddenly, the room felt a little colder. I looked at the magnificent pile of presents under the tree, at the postcard from Santa Fe, and for the first time in a long, long time, a small, dangerous question began to form in my mind. A question not about money, but about value. I was giving everything I had, but what really was I getting in return? The question hung in the air, unanswered. I took a deep breath of the pine-scented air, trying to push it away, trying to focus on the joy to come, on the laughter of the children, on the image of a happy family all together. I was the benefactor, the keeper of the peace. That was my role. And this Christmas, like every Christmas before, I would play it to perfection. At least that's what I believed at the time. The next morning, the Denver sky was still a silvery winter gray. The snow had stopped, leaving a thin, pristine blanket over everything, from the front lawn to the bare branches of the trees. The quiet of the outside world was a stark contrast to the small storm brewing inside me after Kevin's call. I tried to push it aside, the way you do with unwelcome, inconvenient feelings. I told myself it was just old-age sensitivity, that I was reading too much into a rushed phone call. Kevin was busy, the kids were loud. That's just life. To chase away the thoughts, I did what I always did when I needed to find my center. I went to the kitchen. The smell of butter, sugar, and vanilla has always been a balm to my soul. I decided to bake a batch of gingerbread men, the kids' absolute favorite. I tied on my faded floral apron, a familiar companion through 1,000 culinary adventures. I switched on the old radio on the windowsill, letting the soft sounds of classic jazz fill the space. As I kneaded the dough, rolled it to a perfect thinness, and carefully cut out each little man with a cookie cutter, my hands worked on autopilot, but my mind wandered. I thought about being a mother, a grandmother. It was a lot like this baking. You put in the best ingredients: love, time, patience, and yes, money. You mix it all together, hoping to create something sweet and whole. You never calculate the cost of each egg or every spoonful of sugar. You just give. When the golden brown cookies came out of the oven, the entire kitchen was filled with the warm, spicy aroma of ginger, cinnamon, and molasses. I let them cool for a bit before starting the decoration. I whipped up some royal icing, divided it into small bowls, and added festive colors. With a piping bag, I meticulously drew on red button vests, chocolate smiles, and curly hair made of white icing. Each cookie was a small work of art, a tangible message of love. I wasn't doing this because anyone asked me to. I did it because I wanted to. Because I loved the way the kids' eyes would light up when they saw them. That was my payment. At least, that's what I'd always believed. After the cookies were all nestled in a festive tin, I looked at the clock. It was still early afternoon. A thought struck me. Instead of waiting until tomorrow evening to bring the cookies, why not take them over to the kids right now? A little surprise. Besides, I had something else I wanted to give Kevin and Brenda. That morning, when I'd stopped by the post office, I had also swung by the caterer to make the final confirmation and pick up the paid-in-full invoice. The invoice for $2,150 for the lavish Christmas feast I had ordered for the whole family. I wasn't planning on telling them. I was just going to quietly slip it into a Christmas card, an extra gift. I wanted to take that financial burden off their shoulders so they could truly enjoy the holiday. I thought I was doing a good thing, a pure act of love. I placed the cookie tin in a large paper bag, carefully tucking the folded invoice into my purse. I put on my thick wool coat, wrapped the scarf Dylan had given me around my neck, and headed out. The cold air hit my face, but the anticipation of seeing my grandchildren's joy warmed me. The drive to Kevin's neighborhood was only 15 minutes, a route so familiar I could do it without thinking. The car glided past festively decorated houses with strings of colored lights on the roofs and Christmas wreaths on every door. Everything looked so peaceful and happy. I put on some classic Christmas carols and hummed along softly. The unease from yesterday had nearly vanished, replaced by the warmth of my chosen role, the bringer of joy. I turned onto the paved driveway of Kevin's house. It was a large, modern-style home, with big glass windows and a perfectly manicured lawn, now dusted with a light layer of snow. It looked impressive, successful, exactly the kind of house Robert and I had always wanted for our children. But it also had a certain coldness to it, so different from the cozy, lived-in clutter of my own home. I parked the car, grabbed the bag of cookies, and walked toward the house. Instead of going to the front door and ringing the bell, I habitually walked around the side to the door that led directly into the mudroom and kitchen. I always did that. It felt more familiar, like a family member, not a guest. I didn't want to interrupt anything. I thought I was being considerate. I gently turned the doorknob. It was unlocked. I smiled. That meant they were home. I pushed the door open quietly and stepped inside, trying not to make a sound. The mudroom was dimly lit, filled with winter coats and snow-dusted boots. From the kitchen just beyond, I could hear voices and laughter, Brenda's clear tones and Kevin's deeper rumble. They were sharing a happy moment. I paused in the doorway, not wanting to intrude. I'd just wait a moment, let them finish their story. The paper bag in my hand was getting heavy. I shifted it to my other hand, and as I did, my purse slipped a little. I caught it with my free hand, my fingers brushing against the crisp edge of the catering invoice inside. And then I heard Brenda's voice, clear as a bell, from the kitchen. It was light, almost mocking. Just let his mom handle the kids. After all, she doesn't do anything anyway, just hangs around the house. Time seemed to stop. Each word, each syllable, lodged in my mind like a sharp shard of glass. Doesn't do anything. The two words echoed in the sudden silence of my mind. The ticking of my grandfather clock back home seemed to be counting out the painful beats in my chest. Just hangs around the house. I held my breath. I couldn't move. I just stood there, a shadow in the darkness of the hallway, frozen in place. And then I heard Kevin laugh. A low, easy laugh. A laugh of agreement. "Yeah," he said, his voice still tinged with amusement. "She's got it covered. We'll have a relaxing Christmas for once." If Brenda's words were a stab, Kevin's laugh and his confirmation were the twisting of the knife. My son. The son I had carried. The son I had stayed up with through countless fevers. The son whose credit card debt I was still secretly paying off. He didn't just agree. He took it as a given. I wasn't a mother helping out. I was a solution, a convenience, a tool to get them a relaxing Christmas. My whole world shrank to that dark hallway. The air was trapped in my throat. The paper bag with the gingerbread men, the cookies I had poured my love into decorating, suddenly felt as heavy as lead. The thin plastic handle dug into my wrist, a small physical pain that was nothing compared to the agony tearing through my heart. My other hand, the one holding my purse, clenched unconsciously. The invoice inside crumpled. I could hear the faint, dry crinkle of the paper in the dead silence of my realization. $2,150. I had paid that money to buy them a relaxing time, and in return, I got invisibility. My existence, my life, my time, my love, it had all been discounted, dismissed, and summed up in two words: doesn't do anything. I backed away, one step, then another. My movements were slow, stiff, like a puppet with its strings cut. I did my best not to make a sound. The heels of my shoes didn't touch the floor. My breath was held tight in my chest. I had entered this house as a mother, a grandmother bearing gifts. I was now sneaking out like a thief, one who had accidentally stolen a truth she was never meant to know. I pulled the side door closed behind me. The small click of the latch sounded like a gunshot in my mind. I walked across the cold backyard, back to my car. I got into the driver's seat, but I didn't start the engine. I couldn't. I just sat there, staring at the big house, at the warm yellow light spilling from the kitchen window. Inside, my son and his wife were laughing, planning their perfect holiday, a holiday built upon my invisible sacrifice. The cold from the leather seat seeped through my coat, but I felt nothing. A different, much deeper cold was spreading from my chest, through my entire body. I looked down at my hands. One wrist had a red mark where the bag handle had dug in. The other was still clutching my purse. I shakily opened it and pulled out the crumpled invoice. The number, $2,150, stared back at me like a mockery. I had thought I was giving a gift, but I was wrong. This wasn't a gift, it was a transaction where I was the only one who didn't know the terms. I had paid for the party, and the price included my services, my presence as a free babysitter, and the complete erasure of my value as a human being. Those words kept playing over and over in my head, a ghostly soundtrack I couldn't turn off. Doesn't do anything, just hangs around the house. She's got it covered. We'll have a relaxing time. I rested my forehead against the cold steering wheel. The car was a silent cocoon, shielding me from the outside world, but it couldn't shield me from the truth. The truth that in the eyes of the very son I loved with every fiber of my being, I was no longer a person with my own needs and desires. I had become a function, a resource, a default setting, always there, ready to be used. I don't remember much of the drive home. The familiar roads felt foreign. The beautifully decorated houses looked like a sham. The Christmas carols on the radio sounded like a lie. When I got home, I placed the paper bag with the cookie tin on the kitchen counter. The smiling gingerbread men looked naive and mocking. All the love, all the care I had poured into them now tasted like ash in my mouth. I sat there at the kitchen table, facing that tin full of smiling gingerbread men. The warm yellow light of the kitchen couldn't chase away the chill that had settled deep in my bones. I placed the crumpled catering invoice, the physical proof of my invisibility, right beside the tin. $2,150. To me, it wasn't money anymore. It was a measurement of disrespect. I couldn't sit still. I stood up and walked into the living room. The fire in the hearth had died down, leaving only glowing embers. I paced back and forth on the rug, my steps silent, but my mind was screaming. Those words swirled in my ears. Doesn't do anything, just hangs around the house. I wasn't the one who did nothing. I was the one who did everything. And then the memories started to flood in, not in chronological order, but in order of pain. They came like a rapid-fire slideshow, each one an undeniable piece of evidence for the role I'd been cast in, the default resource. I remembered 3 years ago, when Brenda had minor shoulder surgery. Kevin called me at 6 a.m., his voice frantic. "Mom, I can't get off work, and Brenda needs someone. Can you come over? Just for a week or so." That week stretched into 3. I handled everything: school pickups and drop-offs, cooking, laundry. I even reorganized a closet at Brenda's request. I remember staying up until 11 p.m. one night to finish a history project for Leo, my oldest grandson. When I finally left, all Brenda said was a clipped, "Thanks, Mom. I'm feeling much better now." Not a single question about whether I was tired, not an offer for gas money. I didn't ask for it, but I also didn't get any appreciation. I was just filling a gap. Then there was Thanksgiving last year. I spent all of Wednesday cooking, bringing everything over to their house: the turkey, the mashed potatoes, the pumpkin pie. I was the only one up early enough to put the bird in the oven, and the last one to leave after cleaning the mountain of dishes. That night, I asked Kevin where I'd be sleeping. "Oh, Mom," he said, scratching his head with a look of fake confusion. "The Petersons, Brenda's parents, took the guest room. Would you mind the pull-out sofa in the basement?" The basement was cold. The pull-out sofa was hard and creaky. There were no pillows, no sheets, just a thin wool blanket tossed over the armrest. Brenda said, "Oh my gosh, I am so sorry. I completely forgot. I'll grab you some bedding right now." But then she disappeared into the kitchen and never came back. I spent one of the worst nights of my life, treated worse than a stranger passing through. 2 years ago, Mother's Day, I sat on my porch all day, my phone on the table beside me, waiting for a call, a text. Neither Kevin nor Dylan called. I tried to make excuses. It must be the time difference. They must be busy. Dylan texted at 11 p.m. Sorry, Mom. Was out in the woods all day with no signal. Love you. A sincere apology. But Kevin? I called him the next day. He said, Oh, Mother's Day. I forgot. I thought Brenda sent something from both of us. His voice was casual, as if it were a chore he'd delegated to his wife and didn't need to think about again. My son's love had been outsourced. And the wedding photos, Logan and Emily's. No, wait, Kevin and Brenda's. I was up at 4 a.m. to get ready. I personally ironed Kevin's shirt, tied his bow tie for him. I helped Brenda pin flowers in her hair. But when the official wedding album came out, I wasn't in a single one of the important shots. Not the family portrait, not the cake cutting, not the pictures of the bride and groom with their parents. When I asked about it, Kevin said, Oh, you must have stepped out right then. I remember you went somewhere. I remembered exactly where I went. I went to the venue's restroom to clean up a red wine spill on the floor caused by a clumsy waiter. I was doing that while everyone else was posing for the perfect family photo. I had been erased from my son's most important moment because I was busy cleaning up a mess. I slumped back down in my chair. These memories, they weren't isolated stumbles. They were a pattern of behavior, a pattern that had been set a long, long time ago. I wasn't a respected mother. I was a convenient tool. I turned back to the table. I picked up the crumpled $2,150 invoice. It didn't hurt me anymore. It made me terrifyingly calm. The rage cooled, leaving behind a cold, steely resolve. I took a pen and flipped over an old receipt. I started to write. I listed everything I had given. Monthly credit card payments. Last-minute babysitting for all 3 kids. 3 weeks of post-op care for Brenda. Cooking and cleaning for Thanksgiving. Sleeping on a basement sofa without bedding. No photos in the wedding album. And so many more. The given column stretched all the way down the page. The received column was stark white, a cold, empty space with nothing to write. I put the pen down. The truth didn't need any more proof. Seeing that long list of what I had given made me realize that all I really wanted in return was simple respect from my children, but apparently that was too much for them to give, and too much of a luxury for me to expect. It was the quietest moment, but it was the loudest explosion of my life. I didn't want revenge. I wanted justice. I wanted respect. I wanted to be free. Pat's name suddenly popped into my head, as bright as the Santa Fe sunset on her postcard. Pat had once told me, "Your love isn't a leash, Joan." I stood up and walked to the phone. I found Pat's number. My finger hovered over the call button. I didn't call Pat just yet. The first thing I needed to do was take back what I had given. I needed to send a clear, wordless message that the game was over. I called the catering company. Hello, this is Joan Miller. I need to cancel my Christmas party order for December 25th. The receptionist on the other end sounded confused, but professional. Oh, Mrs. Miller, but that order has already been paid in full. Is there a problem? No problem at all, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. Just a change of plans. I'd like to cancel and receive a refund. There was the sound of typing. We can refund you $1,250 after the non-refundable deposit and the cost of ingredients already purchased. $1,250. It was a significant number, but it didn't matter. The action was what mattered. Thank you. Please process the refund back to my account. I hung up, feeling a cold rush. It was a small financial loss, but it was an enormous spiritual victory. I had withdrawn my support. This Christmas, the perfect feast they were expecting would never arrive. Immediately after, I called my lawyer, not about my will, about updating my financial arrangements. I didn't give him the details, just instructed him to freeze Kevin's access to the joint savings account I'd set up, just in case, and to move the bulk of the funds into a separate personal account under my name only. I had locked the treasury door. Only when that was done did I finally call Pat. The phone rang 3 times. Pat's voice came on the line, warm and a little raspy. "Who's this? I'm wrestling with my kiln over here." "It's Joan," I said. My voice trembled slightly. Not from fear, but from a powerful, new emotion, liberation. "Joan, good heavens, what's going on? I knew you'd call. What does poor little Kevin need you to do now?" I took a deep breath. I looked out the window where the snowflakes still clung to the glass, sparkling like diamonds. "I'm not doing anything anymore, Pat," I said, my voice stronger than it had been in years. "I'm doing something for me. This Christmas, I won't be in Denver. I'm coming to Santa Fe. I'm on my way." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then, Pat let out a laugh, a huge, booming, genuine belly laugh. "It's about time, you old gal. Good for you, good for you. What do you need? I'll start getting things ready." "I don't need anything, Pat. I just need a chair by a fireplace, a glass of wine, and absolutely no screaming children. I'm coming to find myself." When I hung up the phone, I felt an unfamiliar, incredible lightness. It was like I had just shrugged off a heavy coat I'd been wearing for 20 years. I had set my feet on a new path. I had chosen a different family. A family of my own choosing. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't the invisible mother. I was just Joan. And Joan was hitting the road. That phone call with Pat was like the starting gun for a race I didn't even know I was running. Before, every action I took was planned around someone else's needs. The kids' school schedules, Kevin's work calendar, Brenda's social events. But now, for the first time in decades, I was making a plan for myself. The feeling was both thrilling and terrifying, like stepping out of a familiar, stuffy room into fresh but completely unknown air. I didn't rush. This change wasn't an impulse. It was a rebuilding from the foundation up. I moved through my own house with a new sense of calm and purpose. Every action, no matter how small, felt significant, another step on the road to freedom. The first thing I did was go back to the kitchen. I looked at the tin of gingerbread cookies, their white icing smiles now looking completely hollow. Without a moment's hesitation, I picked up the tin, walked to the back door, and tipped the entire batch into the organic waste bin. The sound of the cookies cracking as they hit the bottom was strangely satisfying. It wasn't an act of anger, but of finality. I was throwing away my role as the sweet, benevolent grandmother who always brought treats. This winter, there would be no sweetness coming from me. Next, I went to my study. I sat down at the computer screen where, just hours before, I had made that mindless payment. This time, my actions were fully conscious. I logged into my bank account. I looked at the balance of the joint savings account I had set up for Kevin. It was a substantial number, built up over many years, an emergency fund that had, in reality, become a convenience fund for their lifestyle. I remembered my conversation with my lawyer that morning. He had advised me on the quickest, most legal way to do this. With a few clicks, I followed his instructions. I transferred 95% of the funds from that account into a new, more secure investment account under my name only. The remaining 5% I left there, a small enough number not to trigger an immediate alarm, but also small enough to be useless for any real hardship. I didn't want to destroy them completely. I just wanted to dismantle the support system I had built. I had locked the treasury door. When the email confirmation of the transaction appeared in my inbox, I felt another knot in my chest loosen. The financial tether, the strongest and most invisible cord of all, had been cut. They wouldn't know right away. It would probably be at the end of the month, when an unexpected bill came and they tried to draw on the funds, that they would realize. My silence would be the first message. With the finances handled, I started to prepare for my journey. I went upstairs to my bedroom and pulled a medium-sized suitcase from the top of the closet. Not the big one I used for trips to see Dylan in Oregon, trips that were always packed full of gifts for them. This one was smaller, more compact. It was just for me. I opened my closet. My eyes scanned the sensible dresses I wore to family functions, the sweaters with cheerful Christmas patterns. I passed over them all. My hands reached for things tucked deep inside. My favorite pair of old, but perfectly comfortable blue jeans. A cream-colored turtleneck sweater I'd bought for myself years ago but rarely wore because it was too plain. A sturdy pair of walking boots. I was choosing clothes not to impress anyone, but to feel comfortable and to feel like myself. I was packing a different version of Joan Miller, one who had been put away for far too long. As I was folding my clothes, my phone buzzed on the dresser. The screen lit up with Brenda's name. My heart skipped a beat, a conditioned reflex of anxiety. Maybe they needed something. Maybe one of the kids was sick. Maybe they wanted to change the babysitting plans for Saturday night. I stared at the vibrating phone. The old me would have answered instantly, my voice ready to accommodate. But this time, I just watched it. I let it ring. I counted each buzz. 1, 2, 3, 4. After the 5th ring, it stopped. The screen read, "One missed call." A small but potent feeling of power rose in me. I hadn't answered. I had chosen not to answer. For the first time, my availability was not the default. My silence was my answer. Brenda didn't leave a voicemail. A few minutes later, a text message popped up. "Mom, just wanted to ask if you'd mind if the kids slept over at your place on Saturday night. The party might go late. Would be so much easier for us. Let me know." I read the text. Would be so much easier for us. There it was again. Their convenience, their ease put above all else. I didn't reply. I placed the phone face down on the dresser. I wasn't going to let them know. They would have to figure it out for themselves. Their uncertainty was no longer my problem. I continued packing. I put in a paperback novel I'd bought months ago, but hadn't had time to read. It was about a woman who travels through Italy by herself. The irony wasn't lost on me. I packed my old travel mug, the one that had been with me on so many camping trips with Robert. I packed a small notebook and a pen. I didn't know what I would write, but I had a feeling I would have a lot to say to myself. When I zipped the suitcase shut, the sound echoed in the quiet room. It didn't sound like an escape. It sounded like the closing of one chapter and the readiness to open another. I brought the suitcase downstairs and set it by the front door. I looked around my house. Everything was tidy, clean. The Christmas tree was still twinkling, but something had changed. The house was no longer a container for my obligations. It was just a house, and I was about to leave it. Before I left, there was one last thing I needed to do. A symbolic act, just for me. I took a piece of nice letter-writing paper from Robert's desk drawer. With his fountain pen, I wrote a single, careful line. "No one else gets to define your worth." I folded the paper, put it in an envelope, addressed it to myself at my own home, and put a stamp on it. I would mail it tomorrow morning, on my way out of town. It was a letter from my present self to my future self. A reminder, a vow, proof that I had started listening to my own voice, the one that had been whispered for far too long under the weight of expectations. That night, I didn't sleep in my bedroom. I pulled a blanket from the closet and slept on the couch in the living room, facing the Christmas tree. I wanted to look at it one last time. Not as its creator, but as an observer. I watched the blinking lights, reflected in the glass ornaments. Each ornament held a tiny, distorted image of the room, a miniature version of the world I was about to leave behind. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel giddy either. I felt a deep sense of peace. The peace that comes from knowing you are doing the right thing for yourself, no matter what the consequences might be. Tomorrow morning, when the sun came up, I would leave. I would drive south, toward the desert, toward the warm light of Santa Fe. I didn't know what was waiting for me there. But for the first time in a very, very long time, I felt like I was truly moving forward and not just running in circles. And that, in itself, was everything. The dawn broke over the Rocky Mountains in shades of soft pink and orange, a quiet promise of a new day. I was awake before the first rays of sun came through the window, not startled by an alarm clock but stirred by an inner anticipation, a feeling I hadn't had in years. I didn't make coffee. I didn't turn on the morning news. My daily rituals were broken, and in that break there was a strange kind of freedom. I put on the jeans and sweater I had prepared, pulling on my walking boots. I felt different in these clothes, more practical, more grounded, as if I was putting on a thin suit of armor for the journey ahead. I looked around the living room one last time. The Christmas tree, in the morning light, looked a little tired and artificial. The carefully wrapped gifts beneath it now seemed like hollow promises. I didn't feel a sense of loss. I just felt a sense of distance. I picked up my suitcase, my purse, and my car keys. Before walking out the door, I paused at the small table in the hallway. On it sat a framed photo of Kevin and Dylan as little boys, grinning with missing teeth. I picked up the photo. I looked into Kevin's eyes in the picture, so clear and full of adoration. Where had that little boy gone? Where along the road of life had I lost him? A brief wave of sadness washed over me, not for myself, but for that child, for the relationship that had once been so pure and simple. I set the photo back down, not with anger, but with a sorrowful acceptance. I locked the door behind me. The click of the lock was final. On my way out of the neighborhood, I pulled up to a blue public mailbox. I got out of the car, the morning chill making me shiver. In my hand was the letter I had written to myself. I stared at my own address on the envelope. It felt strange to be sending something to a place you were trying to leave. But this wasn't just a letter. It was an anchor, a reminder of why I left, waiting for me whenever I returned, whoever I might be by then. I pushed it through the narrow slot. The soft thump as it landed at the bottom was the sound of commitment. I drove out of Denver as the city was still stretching and waking up. The highways were sparse with traffic. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't want anyone else's voice invading my space. I wanted silence, not an empty silence, but a space to be filled with my own thoughts, the ones that had been pushed down for so long. As I drove south on Interstate 25, the landscape began to change. The skyscrapers of Denver faded in my rearview mirror, replaced by rolling hills and vast, winter gold prairies. The Colorado sky seemed to go on forever, a dome of brilliant, clear blue. I drove past Colorado Springs, past Pueblo, names that were familiar on a map but were now just markers on my journey to somewhere else. My phone, lying face down on the passenger seat, was silent. I knew that Brenda and Kevin were probably starting to sense something was wrong. They had likely called again. They were probably getting annoyed by my silence. The thought didn't bring me any satisfaction, just a strange sense of detachment. It was like watching a movie about someone else's life. Their problems, their minor panics, were no longer my own. Somewhere near the New Mexico border, I did something I had never done before. I reached for the phone, but instead of checking for messages, I pressed and held the power button. The screen lit up with the words, "Slide to power off." I slid my finger across the screen. It went black. I had turned it off, all the way off. Not silent mode, not airplane mode. Off. I put the phone, now just a dead piece of plastic and metal, into the glove compartment and shut the door. Click. Another small sound of liberation. I was disconnected. I didn't want to know if they were calling. I didn't want to read the messages that might be angry or might be sickeningly sweet. I didn't want to analyze. I didn't want to interpret. I just wanted to drive. When I crossed the border into New Mexico, I felt a distinct shift, not just in the landscape but in the air itself. The green-tinged hills of Colorado gave way to terracotta mesas and dramatic red rock formations. The sky seemed bigger, closer. The sunlight felt hotter, more honest. This was Georgia O'Keeffe country, a land of bold colors and stark shapes, the desert's breath. I was starting to get hungry. I pulled off at a small roadside diner in a town called Raton. It had cracked red leather booths and a long, gleaming counter. An older waitress with salt and pepper hair and a warm smile brought me a cup of hot coffee and a menu. "Where you headed, hon?" she asked, her voice friendly. "I'm on my way to Santa Fe," I replied, "visiting a friend. Santa Fe is beautiful this time of year. You have a good trip now." She didn't ask any more questions. No prying, just simple acceptance. I ordered a plate of scrambled eggs and toast. As I ate, I watched the other patrons. An older couple sharing a newspaper, a truck driver reading a paperback, a young family with 2 kids coloring on their placemats, all of them separate worlds, intersecting for a moment in this little diner. I realized how long it had been since I had just sat alone in a public place and simply observed. I was always busy taking care of someone, making sure everyone had what they needed. Now, the only person I had to take care of was me, and it felt revolutionary. After lunch, I got back on the road. The highway stretched out before me like a gray ribbon through a landscape so vast it was almost overwhelming. I started to think about Kevin, not with anger, but with an almost academic curiosity. When did the change begin? When did that sweet little boy who used to make me hot tea that was mostly lukewarm water transform into a man who saw his mother as an appliance? I don't think there was one single moment. It was more like erosion, a slow, imperceptible process. Every time I said yes when I should have said no, every time I let a small disrespect slide because I didn't want to make a fuss, every time I put their needs ahead of my own, I had taught them how to treat me. I had given them the instruction manual, and they had simply followed it. The fault wasn't entirely theirs. The fault was also mine for letting it happen. That realization didn't make me feel guilty. It made me feel powerful. Because if I was part of the problem, I could also be part of the solution. I couldn't change them, but I could change me. As the Sangre de Cristo Mountains began to appear on the horizon, capped with snow and bathed in the golden afternoon light, I knew I was getting close. Pat lived in a small adobe house on the outskirts of Santa Fe, near an artist's village. She had sent me detailed directions, but I felt like I didn't need them. I felt like I was being pulled forward by some invisible force. I turned onto a small dirt road, a plume of red dust kicking up behind my car. And then I saw it. A small, earth-brown house with turquoise-painted window frames. Smoke was curling from a stone chimney. On the front porch, a woman with short gray hair and a brightly colored sweater stood waving. It was Pat. I pulled up and cut the engine. The desert silence wrapped around me, broken only by the sound of a light wind whistling through the pinyon pines. I stepped out of the car. The air was crisp and dry. I took a deep, full breath, filling my lungs. Pat came down from the porch and wrapped me in a hug. It was a solid, warm hug, with not an ounce of pity in it. "You made it," she whispered in my ear. I nodded, unable to speak. The tears started to come then, but they weren't tears of pain. They were tears of relief, the tears of a pilgrim who had finally reached her sanctuary. The first few days in Santa Fe were like waking up slowly from a long, troubled sleep. The world at Pat's little homestead operated on a completely different rhythm. There were no rigid schedules, no urgent demands. Time was measured by the movement of the sun across the adobe walls, by the chirping of birds in the morning and the hum of crickets at dusk. Pat was the perfect host, precisely because she did almost nothing. She didn't fuss over me, asking if I was okay. She didn't try to fill the silence with empty platitudes. She simply created a safe space for me to just be. She gave me a small, cozy guest room with a hand-woven wool blanket and a window that looked out toward the distant Jemez Mountains. She showed me where the coffee was and said, "Make yourself at home. My pottery studio is out back. Come by if you want or don't." And so I did. I slept. I slept more than I thought was possible. Deep, dreamless sleeps, uninterrupted by worries about other people. When I was awake, I sat on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, cradling a mug of hot tea. I watched the clouds drift across the deep blue sky, a blue so rich and profound it felt like you could fall into it. I didn't try to think. I didn't try to analyze. I just watched and breathed, breathing in the clean desert air, breathing out years of accumulated fatigue. On the third day, I wandered into Pat's studio. It was a creatively cluttered space, flooded with natural light. The smell of damp earth and ceramic glazes hung in the air. Pat was at her potter's wheel, her hands covered in clay, her focus absolute as she shaped a large vase. She looked up and smiled. "Want to try?" she asked. I hesitated, but she was already getting up, wiping her hands on her apron and pointing to a prepared lump of clay. "Don't think," she said. "Just feel." I sat down. The cool, pliable feel of the clay under my hands felt foreign and elemental. I started the wheel. The clay wobbled hopelessly at first, but Pat gently placed her hands over mine, guiding them. Slowly, from the center. Always from the center. And I started to understand. I wasn't trying to make a bowl or a mug. I was just letting my hands move, feeling the pull of the spinning clay. Gradually, a shape began to form. It wasn't perfect. It was lopsided, but it was mine. For the first time in years, I was making something not to serve or please someone else. I was making it for the sheer joy of creation. It was a revelation. I spent hours in the studio that day. When I left, my mind was blessedly quiet. The angry voices, the painful memories, seemed to have receded. It was the evening of December 23rd. Christmas Eve was approaching. Pat and I were sitting by the Kiva fireplace in her living room, the pinyon wood fire crackling and releasing a fragrant, incense-like smell. We were drinking red wine and playing a game of gin rummy. Pat was winning. My phone, whose existence I had nearly forgotten, was still in the glove compartment of my car. But Pat was not. She believed in staying connected, but on her own terms. "You know, Joan," she said, laying down a card, "you're going to have to talk to them sooner or later. Silence is a powerful tool, but it's not a permanent solution." I sighed. "I know. I'm just not ready." Ready is a relative term. Sometimes you just have to jump in. As if on cue, Pat's phone, sitting on a small table beside her, began to ring. She looked at the screen, then at me, with a meaningful lift of her eyebrow. "It's an unknown number from Colorado," she said. "Your boy is clever. He found a way to get through." A cold dread washed over me. My sanctuary was being breached. They had found me. Pat answered the call, put it on speaker, and set the phone down between us. "Hello? Is this Pat Holloway?" Kevin's voice came through, strained and sharp as a razor. He wasted no time with pleasantries. "It is." "Who's calling?" Pat asked, her voice calm. "This is Kevin Miller, Joan's son. Is my mother there?" "She might be," Pat replied casually. "How'd you know?" I could practically hear Kevin grinding his teeth over the phone. "I called Dylan. He said she might be with you. Do you have any idea how much trouble you've caused? My mother disappeared. We were about to call the police." "Oh, save the drama, kiddo," Pat said. "Your mother hasn't disappeared. She's simply on vacation. A long overdue one at that." "Vacation?" Kevin nearly shouted. "She canceled our Christmas dinner. She's not answering her phone. This isn't a vacation, it's a selfish tantrum. You put my mother on the phone right now." Pat looked at me. I took a deep breath and nodded. It was time. She handed me the phone. My hand trembled slightly as I took it. "Kevin," I said, my voice smaller and raspier than I expected. "Mom, where are you? What the hell are you doing?" His rage was completely undisguised. I took a sip of wine, trying to steady myself. "I'm in Santa Fe with Pat. I needed some time for myself." "Time for yourself? You pick Christmas Eve to need time for yourself? Do you have any idea how Brenda has been scrambling, calling everywhere to find another caterer? Everything is booked. You've ruined Christmas." I stayed quiet, letting a storm pass over me. I didn't defend myself. I didn't apologize. When he finally paused for breath, I spoke, my voice even and devoid of emotion. "No, Kevin, I didn't ruin Christmas. I simply withdrew my funding and my services from an event I wasn't even graciously invited to. I heard your conversation with Brenda in the kitchen." There was a dead silence on the other end of the line. I had dropped my bomb. After a moment, he spoke, his voice lower, but still seething. "What are you talking about? Don't play dumb, Kevin. I heard you say I don't do anything, that I would have it covered, and that you two would have a relaxing time. I realized what my role was in your little plan, and I declined to play the part." He sputtered, trying to find a defense. You must have misheard. We were just joking around." "It wasn't a joke, Kevin. It was the truth, and it's a truth I'm tired of." And then Brenda cut in. I could hear her grab the phone. Her voice was sickly sweet, but with a sharp edge underneath. "Joan, I think there's been a huge misunderstanding. We love you. We always want you to be part of our holidays. We just didn't want you to overwork yourself." "Then why were you planning on having me babysit the kids?" I asked, point blank. "Well," Brenda faltered, caught. "Mom, I think you're just tired and being overly sensitive. You have no idea what we've been going through. The pressure Kevin is under at work, the kids. We really needed your help. You've left us high and dry." And there it was. The pivot, her accusation, her victimhood, was the very door I had been waiting for. I signaled to Pat. She understood immediately, went to my handbag, and pulled out the small file I had carefully brought with me. It was the summary I had prepared, the highlighted pages of bank statements. I spoke into the phone, my voice now ice cold. "Brenda, you talk about hardship? You say I have no idea about your life?" "That's right," she said, sensing she was gaining the upper hand. Then allow me to enlighten you, I said. I began to read, my voice clear and deliberate. In March of this year, $1,200 for a weekend getaway to Aspen that I paid for via Zelle. In June, $850 for Leo's tennis camp. In September, $2,300 to fix the transmission on your SUV. And for the past 10 years, I have been quietly paying, on average, $1,500 a month on your credit card bill. In total, over the last decade, I have subsidized your family, directly and indirectly, to the tune of over $180,000. The silence on the other end of the line was no longer the silence of anger. It was the silence of pure, unadulterated shock. I pressed on, giving them no time to recover. I know a great deal about your life, Brenda, because I have been financing it. You aren't struggling. You are simply used to living beyond your means on my dime. So don't you dare talk to me about being left high and dry. The only person who has been backed into a corner for years is me. I could hear a choked gasp. From now on, I concluded, my voice a final judgment, you are on your own. The Bank of Mom is closed. Enjoy the Christmas you pay for yourselves. Good luck. Before either of them could say another word, I ended the call. I set the phone down on the table. My hand was shaking, not from fear but from adrenaline. I had done it. I had spoken the truth, not with anger, but with irrefutable facts and figures. Pat was looking at me, her eyes wide with something that looked like awe. She picked up the wine bottle and refilled my glass to the brim. "Damn, Joan," she said. "That was the most magnificent thing I have ever witnessed. Cheers to you." She raised her glass. "To spreadsheets," she said, "and the truth they tell." I raised my own glass and clinked it against hers. The sound of the glass chiming in the quiet room was the clean, crisp sound of victory. That night, for the first time, I didn't just feel peaceful. I felt powerful. I had taken my story back. The quiet after the phone call didn't last long. I knew they wouldn't give up that easily. The shock of the financial revelation would quickly give way to panic, followed by the cornered anger of the entitled. It didn't come immediately. They needed time to process, to confer, to build a united front. They gave me 2 days of peace. Those 2 days, December 24th and 25th, were the most serene Christmas of my entire life. Pat and I did nothing special. We didn't try to create a festive atmosphere. We just lived. On Christmas Eve, we cooked a big pot of hearty pozole, a traditional New Mexico stew, and invited a few of Pat's artist neighbors over. They brought homemade tamales, a bottle of good tequila, and easy laughter. No one asked me about my family. No one offered pity. They welcomed me as an old friend, asking me about my interests, about the books I'd read. I found myself laughing, a real deep belly laugh, something I hadn't done in a very long time. I realized how much I had forgotten what it felt like to be seen as an individual, a person with her own stories and preferences, not just a collection of roles, Kevin's mother, Leo, Maya, and Noah's grandmother. Here, among these strangers, I was Joan again, and it felt wonderful. On Christmas morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee and cinnamon toast. Pat had made breakfast. We sat out on the porch, the winter sun warm on our faces. There was no screaming for presents, no wrapping paper strewn across the floor, no stress of trying to please everyone. Just the silence of the desert, the sound of the wind, and the easy conversation of two friends. It was the most precious Christmas gift I had ever received. But I knew the peace was temporary. And it ended on the afternoon of the 26th. I was in the studio, trying to center a small bowl on the potter's wheel, when Pat came in, her face an unreadable mask. "They're here," she said simply. My heart seized. I didn't have to ask who they were. I wiped my hands on a towel, taking a deep, steadying breath. The adrenaline started to rise, but this time it was accompanied by a cold clarity. I was ready. "Where?" I asked. "At the gate. Their black SUV. They don't look like they're here to drop off a Christmas card." "Don't let them on the property," I said. "This is your space. I'll go out there." "Are you sure?" Pat asked, concerned. "I can." "I'm sure," I interrupted. "This is my fight. I have to face it myself." I took off my apron, walked through the house, and stepped out onto the front porch. Their gleaming black SUV looked absurdly out of place on the red dirt road, like an invasive beetle. They were both out of the car and just standing there, arms crossed, as if they were laying siege to a fortress. Brenda was wearing an expensive-looking faux fur coat. Kevin had on a cashmere sweater. They looked more like victims of a fashion disaster than people in financial distress. I walked down the steps and stopped in the small yard. I didn't get any closer. I wanted to keep a distance, both physically and emotionally. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice even. Kevin stepped forward. His face was flushed, his jaw tight. The shock was gone, replaced now by raw fury. He was no longer a panicking son. He was an accuser. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he snarled. "Who do you think you are? Turning a private conversation into some financial witch hunt and thinking you can just hide out here?" "It wasn't a witch hunt, Kevin," I said calmly. "It was the truth, and I'm not hiding. I'm resting." Brenda let out a short, ugly laugh. "Resting? You call airing your family's dirty laundry, humiliating us, resting? Do you have any idea what you've done? You've made us out to be villains." "I haven't made you out to be anything," I replied. "I simply stopped allowing you to make me into an ATM and a maid. Your actions are what define who you are." My logic only seemed to fuel the fire. Kevin took another step closer, his voice dripping with contempt. "Oh, so you're a saint now? A victim? Did you forget that everything you have is because Dad left it to you? He worked his whole life to make sure this family was taken care of. You have a paid-off house, a fat pension. You're sitting on a pile of money while your son is struggling to build a life for his family. So what? You're my mother. It's your duty. Dad left you everything. You have an obligation to take care of this family." His words were a punch to the gut. He was using Robert's legacy, my husband's love, against me, twisting his care into a chain for me. Brenda was quick to jump on it, her voice now full of self-righteousness. "That's right. We are building a future for your grandchildren. You should be proud to help. That's a grandmother's joy. Instead, you selfishly run off to play with your friends, abandoning your family when they need you most. That's not what a mother does." I looked at them, at my son's face, contorted with rage, at the vicious satisfaction in my daughter-in-law's eyes. They actually believed what they were saying. In their world, I did not exist as an individual. I only existed in relation to them. My role was to give, and theirs was to take. Any deviation from that script was a betrayal. A weariness washed over me. A deep, bone-weary exhaustion. I was done arguing. I was done explaining. I realized that logic and truth had no effect here. They didn't want to understand. They just wanted me to get back in my box. I let the silence hang in the dry desert air. I let their accusations just float there. When I was sure they were finished, I looked Kevin directly in the eye. I didn't see my son anymore. I saw a stranger, a man demanding something he thought he was entitled to. My voice, when I spoke, held no anger, no pain. It was simply empty. "You talk a lot about a mother's duty," I said, each word slow and clear. "Have you ever, even once, considered a son's?" The question, so simple and direct, seemed to stun them. It wasn't an accusation, it was a mirror. A mirror that reflected the complete void in our relationship. What was a son's duty? To love? To respect? To care? To be grateful? He had done none of those things. Kevin opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. For the first time, he looked lost, as if the map of his world had suddenly been redrawn. I didn't wait for an answer. I knew there wasn't one. I turned my back on them. "This conversation is over," I said over my shoulder. "You need to leave." The act of me turning my back seemed to snap them out of their stupor and back into their rage. "You can't do this," Kevin shouted at my back. "You can't just turn your back on your family." I kept walking toward the porch. "You're going to regret this," Brenda shrieked, her voice shrill with fury. And then Kevin hurled his final words, a threat, a dark prophecy born of his desperation. "You're going to be calling us. You won't last a week being so lonely." I put my hand on the doorknob. I paused for a moment, but I didn't turn around. His words didn't hurt me, because I knew he was wrong. I wasn't lonely. I was just alone. And for the first time in my life, I understood the vast, liberating difference between the two. I walked into the house and closed the heavy wooden door behind me. The thud of the door was a full stop. I leaned my back against it, letting out a long, shaky breath. Pat was standing there in the hallway, her face etched with concern. She didn't say anything, just came and put a hand on my shoulder. "It's over," I whispered. "No," Pat said softly, "it's just begun." Kevin was wrong. So profoundly wrong. His final words, "You won't last a week being so lonely," hurled like a curse, were supposed to eat away at me during the long, quiet desert nights. They were supposed to become a self-fulfilling prophecy, driving me to snatch up the phone in desperation, begging for forgiveness, begging to be let back into my familiar role. But the curse didn't work, because it was built on a false premise that their absence would create a void in me. The truth was, their absence created space. 2 months had passed since that fiery confrontation on the red dirt road. A cold January had given way to a February of warmer days and still chilly nights. I hadn't gone back to Denver right away. Pat had insisted I stay as long as I needed, and I took her up on the offer. I needed time for this change to settle into my bones, for this new version of myself to become not just a temporary reaction, but a sustainable state of being. Life in Santa Fe continued its slow, deliberate rhythm. I was no longer a guest. I had become a part of the place. I had a new routine, one built around what brought me joy, not what was required of me. In the mornings, I woke up early, not to make breakfast for anyone, but to walk. I'd hike the desert trails as the sun rose, watching the light change the color of the mountains from purple to pink to gold. The air was clean and sharp. I learned the names of the cacti, the difference between the call of a pinyon jay and a house finch. I felt my body growing stronger, my feet more certain on the earth. I wasn't walking for exercise, I was walking to reconnect with the world and with myself. Afterward, I would spend a few hours in Pat's studio. My hands had grown familiar with the feel of clay. I had learned how to center it on the wheel, a meditative lesson in patience and absolute focus. My first bowls were lopsided and ugly, but Pat would just smile and say, "Keep going, no judgment, just do." And I did. Slowly, more pleasing shapes began to emerge under my hands. Small cups, imperfect but unique plates. I wasn't making them to sell or to give away. I was making them because the process itself was the reward. It was teaching me that from a chaotic mess, if you were patient and focused on the center, something of value could be created. It was a metaphor for my own life. In the afternoons, I'd often read on the porch or drive into town. Santa Fe was a city of art and history. I wandered the galleries on Canyon Road, not to buy but to look. I spent hours in the museums, learning about the native Pueblo culture. I sat in coffee shops, drinking tea, and just watching people, listening to the snippets of conversation in English and Spanish. I wasn't lonely. I was alone, and I was savoring it. I realized that much of the loneliness I had felt in Denver wasn't from a lack of people, but from a lack of myself. I had been so busy being everything to everyone else that I had forgotten how to be my own companion. One evening, as we were having dinner, Pat asked the question I knew she'd been wanting to ask. "Do you miss them?" she asked gently, meaning my grandchildren. I paused, thinking honestly. "I miss the children," I admitted. "I miss their little persons. I miss Maya's laugh and Leo's endless questions. But I don't miss the role that came with them, Pat. I don't miss the chaos, the expectation, the feeling of being a service provider instead of a grandmother." "You don't feel guilty?" "No," I said, and I was surprised at the certainty in my own voice. "Guilt is what you feel when you've done something wrong. I didn't do something wrong. I just stopped doing something that was wrong for me. That's not the same thing." As February drew to a close, I knew it was time to go back. Not because I missed Denver, but because I was no longer afraid of it. Santa Fe had been my sanctuary, my healing place. But my home, my life, was in Colorado. I needed to go back and face it, not as the old Joan, but as the new one. The drive back was completely different from the drive out. I wasn't running away. I was returning. As I drove into Denver, I didn't feel the familiar heaviness. I looked at the city with new eyes. It wasn't a place of obligation. It was just a place. My house greeted me in silence. Everything was as I had left it. The now brittle Christmas tree still stood in the corner. The unopened gifts were still there. The first thing I did was dismantle the tree. I carefully packed the ornaments away. I dragged the dry tree outside. Then, I gathered all the presents. I didn't open them. I didn't throw them away either. I carried them up to the attic and stored them in a corner. Maybe someday I'd be ready to deal with them, but not now. I spent the first week cleaning and reorganizing my house, but it was more than a physical cleaning. It was a clearing of space. I turned the spare bedroom, which had been filled with toys for the grandkids, into my own painting studio. I bought an easel, a set of watercolors, and good quality paper. I didn't know how to paint, but I wanted to learn. I joined a book club at the local library. I started volunteering at a botanical garden, spending 2 mornings a week tending to the rose bushes. I filled my life with things that brought me joy and connections based on shared interests, not family obligation. My laugh became more frequent. I found myself humming as I worked in the garden. I slept better. The worry lines on my forehead seemed to have softened. A new friend from my book club said to me one day, "You have such a peaceful energy, Joan." I almost cried when she said it. Peaceful. It was a word no one had ever used to describe me before. I didn't block Kevin's number, but I also didn't reach out. I heard nothing from them. I had created my own bubble of peace, and I was fiercely protective of it. Kevin had been wrong. I hadn't just survived my loneliness. I had bloomed in the quiet. I had discovered that happiness isn't something you get from other people. It's something you build, from the inside out. My newfound peace was like the still surface of a mountain lake. I knew that beneath that surface the world was still moving, and that sooner or later a stone would be tossed in, breaking the calm. That stone arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in late March. I was in my backyard, gloved and carefully pruning the deadwood from my rose bushes. The sun was warm, and the air smelled of damp earth and the promise of spring. I was completely lost in my work, the kind that requires focus but brings a sense of peace. And then, I heard a knock at the front door. It wasn't the knock of the mailman or a neighbor. This knock had a hesitation to it, an almost desperate quality. It was faint and uncertain. I took off my gloves, set down my pruning shears, and walked around to the front of the house. Through the frosted glass of the front door, I could see a silhouette. My heart beat a little faster, not with fear, but with the knowledge that this moment had finally come. I opened the door. It was Kevin, but it was a version of Kevin I had never seen before. He looked like he had aged 10 years in 2 months. His face was gaunt, with dark circles under his eyes. The designer shirt he was wearing looked wrinkled and too big for his thin frame. His usually perfect hair was a mess, but the most shocking thing was his eyes. The arrogance, the anger, the entitlement, it was all gone. In its place was an emptiness, a bone-deep weariness, and something I had never seen in my son before: shame. He didn't barge in, he just stood on the threshold, as if an invisible barrier was holding him back. "Mom," he said, his voice raspy and broken. Can I come in?" I was silent for a moment, just looking at him. I didn't feel pity. I didn't feel triumph. I just felt a detached sense of observation, like watching a character in a tragic play. I took a step back, holding the door open. It was a wordless invitation. He walked in, and it seemed like he brought the weight of the world into my house with him. He looked around the living room, taking in the changes, the easel in the corner, the new stacks of books on the coffee table, the absence of the Christmas tree. This house was no longer an extension of his world. It had become my own. He didn't sit. He just stood in the middle of the room, his hands hanging limply at his sides. "Things are not good, Mom," he began, his voice barely a whisper. And then the story came tumbling out, not in a rush of anger, but in a halting, shameful torrent. He told me about the risky investments he'd made, using my backup fund as a safety net. He'd been so sure he was going to make a huge profit. But when I cut off the funds, the market took a sudden downturn. Without the money to cover his losses, his entire portfolio had collapsed. He told me about the maxed-out credit cards, about the collection calls that had started coming daily. He told me how Brenda had tried and failed to get a part-time job, having been out of the workforce for so long. They were 2 months behind on their mortgage. The bank had sent a foreclosure notice. As he spoke, I just stood there, leaning against the doorframe, and listened. I didn't interrupt. I didn't judge. I just listened. And as he was talking, a flashback hit my mind, as vivid as if it were happening yesterday. I was sitting in Pat's kitchen, about a week before I left Santa Fe. We were drinking tea. The wind was howling outside, rattling the window frames. "A friend in Denver just called me," Pat had said, her voice careful. "She said there are rumors about Kevin's business, that he's in serious financial trouble." She looked at me, her eyes searching. "Doesn't it make you feel bad, watching your child fail like this? Don't you feel like you should do something?" I looked out the window at the clouds racing across the desert sky. I thought for a long moment before I answered. "No, Pat," I said, and I was surprised at the calm in my own voice. "I don't regret it. I'm sad for him, as a mother, but I don't regret my decision. This is a lesson they have to learn for themselves. Comfort never taught anyone anything. Only the pain of your own mistakes is a good teacher. They need to hit rock bottom. Only then will they learn how to swim back up on their own." Back in the present, I looked at my son, who was standing before me, having clearly hit rock bottom. He had finished his story. Silence filled the room. He couldn't meet my eyes. Finally, he looked up. His eyes were wet. "I'm sorry, Mom," he said, and this time I knew it was real. The pride was stripped away, leaving only raw regret. "I've been a terrible son. We took you for granted. We were selfish and ungrateful. We just took and never thought to give. I was wrong. I'm so sorry." He took a shaky breath. "I'm not here for money. I don't know why I'm here. Maybe just to say that. And to ask you to, I don't know, reconnect with the family. The kids miss you so much. I miss you. We promise we'll change." I looked at him, my grown son, broken in front of me. A part of me, the mother instinct, wanted to run to him, to hold him, to tell him everything would be okay. But the new Joan knew that would ruin everything. To comfort him now would be to rob him of the most valuable lesson he was about to learn. I said nothing. I turned and walked into my study. He probably thought I was walking away, rejecting him again. I could hear his soft, defeated sigh. But I came back a minute later. In my hand was my checkbook. Without a word, I walked to the desk and sat down. I opened the checkbook. He stood there, watching me, a look of confusion and maybe a flicker of faint hope on his face. I wrote a number. It was a very large number. It wasn't everything I had, but it was a significant portion of my remaining savings, money I had planned to use for travel, for home renovations. I signed my name at the bottom. I tore out the check, stood up, and walked over to him. I held it out. He looked down at the check, then back up at me, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Mom, I can't." I held up a hand to stop him, and then I spoke, my voice soft but firm as steel. "I am giving you this money not to buy your affection, nor to demand your duty as a son." I paused, letting the words sink in. "I'm doing this because you are my son, and I don't want my grandchildren to suffer. Consider this your fresh start, not mine. Use it to get back on your own 2 feet." And that's when he completely fell apart. The check fluttered from his numb fingers. He sank to the floor, not dramatically, but as if his legs just couldn't hold him anymore. He buried his head in his hands and began to cry, not the tears of anger or self-pity, but the racking, painful sobs of a man who had finally understood the cost of his actions. I didn't go to comfort him. I just stood there, allowing him the dignity of his moment, the necessary breaking that had to happen before the rebuilding could begin. A long time later, he looked up, his face streaked with tears. He picked up the check, folded it carefully, and put it in his pocket. He got, unsteadily, to his feet. "Thank you, Mom," he whispered. He said nothing more. He knew there were no more words. He turned and walked out the door, closing it softly behind him. I stood in my quiet living room, listening to the sound of his car starting and driving away. I didn't feel a sense of loss at giving away the money. I felt like I had just made an investment, not in his business, but in his character. I had given him the money, but I hadn't given him the old path back. I had given him a way out, but I had forced him to find his own way forward. The lesson had been paid for, and I had a feeling that this time it would stick. That check was not a magic wand. It didn't instantly erase years of hurt or repair a fractured relationship. It was simply a tool, an opportunity. It was what happened next that truly mattered. The week following that encounter was silent. Kevin didn't call to say thank you again. He didn't text with updates, and I knew that was a good sign. He was busy salvaging what was left of his life, not with words, but with action. The change came slowly, the way spring gradually overtakes winter. One Sunday morning, about 2 weeks later, I was in my kitchen making a pot of tea when I heard a familiar car pull up. A moment later, there was a knock at the door, soft and polite. When I opened it, the whole family was there. Kevin, Brenda, and the 3 kids. But there was a marked difference. They didn't come barging in as if they owned the place. They stood on the porch, a little awkwardly, waiting to be invited. The kids, instead of being boisterous, hid behind their parents' legs, looking at me with a mixture of curiosity and shyness. Kevin was holding a beautiful white orchid plant. Brenda held a box of pastries from my favorite bakery. "Hi, Mom," Kevin said, his voice still a little hesitant. We were on our way to the park, and we thought we'd stop by and see if you wanted to come, if you're not busy." If you're not busy. Those 4 words contained a whole new world. For the first time, they were acknowledging that I had a life of my own, that I had plans, that my time was valuable. I looked at them, at the orchid, at the box of pastries, and a small smile touched my lips. "I'd love to. Just give me a few minutes to change." That day at the park was different. Kevin and Brenda didn't sit on a bench staring at their phones while I chased the kids. Kevin played frisbee with Leo. Brenda sat on the grass with Maya, making daisy chains. I sat on a bench under a tree with Noah curled up beside me, reading a picture book together. I wasn't the babysitter. I was a grandmother, enjoying a Sunday afternoon with her family. That was the beginning. The Sundays continued. Not always a big outing. Sometimes they would just stop by for an hour. Kevin would check my rain gutters or help me move a heavy pot. Brenda would bring over some soup she'd made, asking for my cookie recipe. They were no longer arriving with their hands out, but with their hands ready to give. We never spoke about the money again. We never spoke about what happened at Christmas. Some scars don't need to be constantly poked to know they're there. The change in their actions was a more powerful apology than any words could be. They were learning a new language, the language of respect and gratitude, and I, in turn, was learning to trust again. It wasn't perfect, of course. There were moments I'd see a flash of Brenda's old irritation when Noah spilled juice on her new shirt, and my old instinct was to jump in and clean it up. But I held back. I let Brenda handle it. There were times Kevin would start on a complaint about work, and I'd catch myself about to offer unsolicited advice. But I stayed quiet, simply listening. I was resetting the boundaries, not just for them, but for myself. Summer came, bringing the roses in my garden into full bloom. Dylan and his wife flew in from Oregon for a visit. For the first time in years, my whole family gathered in my backyard for a barbecue. But this time, I wasn't the only one in the kitchen. Brenda was in charge of the salad. Dylan's wife brought dessert. Kevin and Dylan manned the grill together. I sat in my familiar porch chair with a glass of iced tea and just watched. I watched my 2 sons, now grown men, standing side by side at the grill, laughing about some childhood memory. I watched my 2 daughters-in-law chatting animatedly at the picnic table. I watched my grandchildren chasing each other across the lawn. There was no tension, no underlying obligations, just the easy comfort of a family truly being present with one another. In that moment, I felt a profound sense of contentment. Now, as the autumn begins to turn the leaves outside my window, I often sit in my painting studio, not always painting, but just reflecting. The journey I've been on this past year has taught me more than the previous 71 years combined. I used to think a mother's love was a one-way street, a constant and unconditional giving. I was wrong. Love, to be healthy, must be a two-way street. It requires respect as much as it requires sacrifice. I learned that saying no is not a selfish act. Sometimes it is the most profound act of love you can offer yourself and, ironically, others. Saying no to their unreasonable demands was how I gave them the space to learn to say yes to their own responsibilities. I gave my son money, but as I thought that day, the greatest gift I truly gave him was my absence. The absence of the familiar safety net forced him to learn how to balance on his own. The fall was painful, but it saved his life. It taught him the value of what he had and the importance of what he had almost lost. I didn't lose a family. I helped my family find itself. We broke down the old, toxic structure, and together we are building a new one based on choice, not on obligation. One that may not be perfect, but is real. My life is quieter now, but it is so much fuller. I still go to my book club on Tuesdays. I still work in my garden on Thursdays. The wall in my studio is now covered with my imperfect watercolors, desert landscapes, roses from my garden. They aren't great art, but they are mine. They are the tangible proof of a life I am creating for myself. My relationship with Kevin and his family is healed, but it is different. It has healthy boundaries. I go to Leo's soccer games not because I have to, but because I want to. I watch the kids one evening so Kevin and Brenda can go on a date, not because it's assumed, but because they asked, kindly, a week in advance. And when I say yes, it is a yes that comes from a place of generosity, not resignation. I learned the final, most important lesson. My value is not defined by my usefulness to others. It is defined by who I am. I am Joan Miller. I am a painter, a gardener, a friend, a reader. I am also a mother and a grandmother. But those roles are no longer the whole of me. They are just a part of a larger, richer picture. That check, that final spreadsheet, was the best investment I ever made. I didn't buy back my son's love. I invested in my own freedom. And the return on that investment is this peace. A peace that can't be measured in dollars and cents, but is priceless all the same.